everybody, welcome to our second podcast in Domain 2 on matter. In this podcast, we are going to look specifically at the properties of water, which is pretty important, particularly when you're talking about life. So why is water such a huge deal? Well, it's our foundation. We need it to survive. It makes up the majority of living things. It sustains life, and without water, life doesn't sustain. And we're trying to find it. It's a finite resource. So we found places like Mars that has ice. So you never know where we might go. As long as there's a water source, we're going to be able to sustain life there. Our life, as we know with our molecules, we are a solution-based chemist. We're solution-based. The chemistry of what makes us who we are, the reactions that occur, are all existing in a liquid medium. Okay, and the majority of anything that's alive is water. So, ergo, our cells are mostly water. Okay, on life in terrestrial areas, we find that water is just one of the few substances that can exist as ice, that can exist as liquid, that can exist as a vapor. Okay, all under normal Earth conditions, which is pretty cool. So it makes our planet very unique. We are unique in the fact of how much water exists on our planet. So if we actually take a second and look at how the distribution of water is, if we look at fresh water on our planet, it really only makes up 3% of the available water on our planet. And of that 3%, you've got the ice caps and the glaciers, groundwater, and then you have surface water, which are your lakes and your swamps. So you can see the actual amount of water that's on our planet is pretty minimal of fresh water. We have plenty of salt. So water does have very unique properties, and that's what makes it so key to life. Okay, they are mainly due to the polarity. Because of this, we result in tons of hydrogen bonds that exist. You can thank hydrogen bonds for how much it hurt when you belly flopped over the summer, probably. And due to things like cohesion and adhesion, that's what allows us to have that adherence of water. So cohesion means the water molecules sticking together themselves. Again, that's that together, that sharing. So cohesion are water molecules sticking to themselves. Adhesion is water molecules sticking to other things. And in both cases, water's really good at doing both. Okay? And so the question is there anything that water can't stick to? I don't know if there is, if there's something, because water is so pretty incredible. It drives, trees can take it from the root systems and suck it up and actually defy gravity due to adhesion within, the systems that take water up. And this is called transpiration, and it's a super big deal. The ability of water to move up the xylem and what's called the xylem and the phloem, which is inside plants and trees. And you can see this, and these water molecules literally stick together and then adhere to the inside, and that's through capillary action that allows these molecules to bing their way up the tree. So it's pretty impressive. And that cohesiveness gives it that very high surface tension. Again, that's why I said that cohesiveness is what allows water molecules to stick together and lets basically organisms, in essence, walk on water or stick to it or hurt a lot when you belly flop. Water also has a very high specific heat, which means it takes a boatload of energy to actually raise the temperature of water a degree Celsius. So in that case, because of that, water is an enormous source of energy with the amount of heat that it actually holds. So it does take quite a bit. Here's some examples of how high the specific heat is. Water has a 4.18 joules per gram to raise it a degree Celsius. Ethanol, on the other hand, has a 1.24 and iron 0.449. So that's why iron heats up so fast. So why is it so high? Why is water so high? What's the big deal? Here's the big deal. Water is a temperature buffer, okay? Because of we get the water along the edges. Okay, right? So here we are in California, and you can see temperate temperatures, but you go in away from the water because of its absorbing all of that heat. Okay, you can now you don't have that buffer anymore when you start hitting a little bit more further inland and temperatures begin to soar. Not to mention that evaporative nature actually cools us because of how much energy it can absorb. So when you're, when Santa's out on his vacation, that evaporation piece is huge in the cooling mechanism. Another super important property of water, ice floats. Okay, solid water is less dense than liquid water. So if I have 25 milliliters of liquid water and I have that same 25 milliliters and I freeze it, it's going to expand. And because it expands, it's less dense. That is weird if you're talking about other things. So it's a really, really unique property, okay, for that to happen. So we see things like as ice happens, the hydrogen bonds actually begin to become very stable bonds, and those stable bonds spread them out and form a crystalline sort of pattern, like what you're seeing right here. Okay, whereas liquid water, they break and reform and break and reform and break and reform all of these hydrogen bonds constantly. And then what would happen if the reverse were true? Like, what if water got actually more dense as it froze? We would be in a really, really big problem because we would have frozen ponds, and this would kill life. So thanks to this factor that water actually expands and is actually its most dense at 4 degrees Celsius, we get lake turnover in the spring, whereas the water on the top, the ice, actually warms up. As soon as it hits 4 degrees, it sinks because it's more dense, and it begins to push the water, and that water begins to flow around, and then what that does is it helps to reoxygenate, move things around, and it's very, very important for life. Okay, so we don't want to lose that, right? Water's also a massively good solvent. It's not a universal solvent. Not everything dissolves in it, but it comes really close. Why? Because a lot of molecules are polar, and if you've got a polar molecule and you put it in a polar molecule, they're going to dissolve. So you get things like when you put salt in water, so and you actually put the salt crystals in, that ionization that forms, you're going to get hydrogen bonds and water molecules actually surrounding all the positive regions surrounding the negative region of the chlorine. You're going to get all the negative regions surrounding the positive regions of the sodium. Okay, and it actually creates this water shell, if you will, around each molecule, spreading them out. Okay, so when you get a large protein here in solution, which is pretty cool, you got all the various polar regions of a protein molecule, and water molecules are just going to spread all around it. And water dissociates, which means water molecules will actually pull apart, and this is vital to our our understanding of things like pH. So because it's polar, it can break apart, meaning those OHs and H's are easily bustable, and this will produce a hydronium ion, which is that OH3 you'll get right there, and hydroxide ion. Okay, so when we were talking about the fact of having H pluses left, you actually get a hydronium ion, okay, instead, which is H3O plus, and that hydroxide ion, which is OH negative. So in pure water, you get equal amounts of these ions. Therefore, you've got a neutral pH. And acids, they donate protons, so in those cases we're getting greater amounts of hydronium ions over hydroxide. pH goes down. And in bases, we accept those protons, and we have more OH negatives than we do hydroniums, and our pH goes up. This is something we're going to talk about. I'm going to expect you guys to know how to handle pH and actually how to calculate it. So here's a little look at some normal solutions. You can find a similar diagram like this in your textbook, but you're not going to have to know specifics, but just to understand, 7's neutral. As I go down the scale of the pH scale, my solutions get far more acidic. When I go up, they get far more basic. And so when we're actually measure pH, we actually measure how much we're measuring the acidity. It is the negative log of the concentration of hydronium ions. So earlier when you took bio, we maybe talked about it as being the concentration of hydrogen ions. Well, it's really hydronium. So now we're getting a little bit more specific in there. And in all solutions, all aqueous solutions, the hydronium ion concentration times that OH concentration is going to equal 10 times negative, to the negative 14th power. So it's a negative logarithmic function that gives us what that pH is. Okay, so like I said, you're going to be asked to be able to calculate not only the pH, but the pOH if given the proper concentration numbers, and we're going to practice this. So what does pH have to do with biology? Well, we know biological systems have a very fine window for tolerance of pH ranges. This is vital to the function of our enzymes. So extreme variation in pHs are bad all around. We'll just say that. They are not good, okay? And they're not good on very, very widespread levels. So if you look just from an internal aspect of how pH inside us might change, we can look at it from an ecological standpoint, where if you have excess CO2 in the air, that's actually going to form carbonic acid in the oceans, and you're actually getting acidification of ocean water, and yeah, that's bad news. Okay, so this effect that it has on coral reef biodiversity is very, very high noted. You've got a healthy reef, tons of stuff going on. I mean, it's Finding Nemo down there. It's gorgeous, right? And then sick reefs you begin to see organisms dying due to the change in the pH. You've got the bleaching that begins to occur, and then finally you end up with a dead reef. And the more organisms that we lose, the less diverse things are, and that's going to start to tip the balance and change the stability of what we have out there. So, and that's going to do it for water. So as you can see, water is pretty important to the functionings of life. So coming up next, we are going to look at and begin to start to focus in on the molecules that help life be life. So we're going to start looking at our backbone, and that is carbon. So until we meet again, have a good night, and I'll catch you guys in class.